and welcome back to my channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I'm going to do a rave review for Elder Race. Elder Race is a science fiction novella written by the now acclaimed Adrian Tchaikovsky that was published last year in November. The Children of Time / Children of Ruin duology is a science fiction favorite of mine, and I had a lot of fun with the Doors of Eden, so Elder Race was most definitely an anticipated release for which I had reasonably high expectations. And even though I didn't actually get around to reading it until last month, it was more than worth the wait, as it is now a new science fiction favorite of mine as well. The base premise of Elder Race is as follows. On a faraway planet peopled with the descendants of ancient human colonists sleeps a lost anthropologist, originally sent there to observe said descendants and their cultures in biostasis in a lonely observation base called the Elder Tower by the locals. One day, this anthropologist, named Nia, is awakened by Linne's fourth daughter, a local princess, and her companion Esha, and is asked to join her on a quest to rid her land of a strange, oozy, and destructively amalgamating phenomenon plaguing humans and wildlife alike. For Linne believes Nia to be a wizard, you see, as her civilization, centuries removed from its technologically advanced spacefaring originators, has devolved to a pre-industrialized state that has no understanding of modern science. Nia's people have thus been mythologized by Linne's, if you will, and this dynamic cultural divide is at the heart of Elder Race's plot and theming. That, and the fact Nia, despite his access to advanced technology, suffers from severe clinical depression. Elder Race is thus science fiction, like I said, with an element of weirder fiction, shall we say, thrown in, that serves to create narrative drive and tension. But from Linne's point of view, it can also be read as fantasy, thanks to Arthur C. Clarke's third law of science fiction, which I'll get back to in a few minutes. Elder Race, to me, qualifies as a fairly quiet but purposeful story. It benefits from a determinedly even pacing, and a style of prose I found both measured and fairly elegant. More elegant, in any case, than I remember the prose being in Children of Time or The Doors of Eden. Which, to be fair, also makes sense since those two are very different stories from both one another and Elder Race. The novella features two points of view, that of Nia, the Elder Race anthropologist, and that of Linne's fourth daughter, a minor princess from one of the tale's exoplanet's nation-states. The narrative arc progresses straightforwardly through the present, with each character, Nia especially, occasionally given to memory flashbacks. The word that keeps popping up in my mind when I think of Elder Race is balanced. I felt the structure and progression of the tale were both perfectly balanced, or near enough to it in any case, and moreover balanced in such a way that I was strongly reminded of Ursula K. Le Guin's shorter works of fiction, which in my book is definitely a plus. Whilst I think Nia and Linne's characters were satisfyingly fleshed out, especially for the, novella format, Elder Race to me is another one of those stories where human character as a whole, as a concept, matters more than individual character work. Each character acts as a theming delivery system, if you will, yet retains enough individuality to make the reader connect with them on a more personal level. Though, since I'm not a primarily character-driven reader, I acknowledge this approach might feel frustrating or too superficial for those who are. That being said, it is a novella after all, and deeper character work in this context would have detracted from the nonetheless emotionally charged theming, in my opinion, which is really what mattered to me most in Elder Race. This precise and balanced approach to character work is another reason why I was reminded of Ursula K. Le Guin's short fiction, and its relevancy especially shone through to me when it came to Nia and the way his character is portrayed in relation to severe chronic depression. It was such a visceral and highly empathetic portrayal, and it is a very large part of the reason why I love this novella so bloody much. Once again, given Elder Race is a novella, it doesn't have the deepest or most thorough world building in the world, and I didn't expect it to. With that in mind, I still found that, just like with the prose and the character work, this element of the book was delicately and satisfyingly balanced overall. You learn just what you need to in order to appreciate the book's themes and follow through with the book's plot. As I put it in my notes, the world building is relatively sparse, but it is also coherent, which, for example, wasn't the case with Aaliyah Whiteley's Skyward Inn, a similarly short science fiction novel. With regards to the plot specifically, you get an understanding of the world that is sufficient to grasp just how strange and threatening that weird element I mentioned at the heart of Elder Race's narrative drive really is. The out-of-placeness of it is made apparent because the world's basic characteristics, it being a planet populated by the civilizationally devolved descendants of technically advanced and spacefaring humans, the titular Elder Race, are clearly established. One element, however, stood out to me as being a bit more developed than the rest. The world's language, as compared to Nia's language. Don't get me wrong, you won't get a fully fleshed out conlang in this novella, right? But care was obviously given to language, and more specifically language evolution, as a concept in the story, important as it is to its theming. Speaking of which, I am primarily an ideas and concepts driven reader, i.e. I geek/nerd out the most when I'm offered competent, creative, and thoughtful world building and themes. This is exactly why I loved Elder Race so much. It packs so much theme-wise in such a relatively short page count, and does it oh so meaningfully too. Elder Race features two primary themes. The first being an impressively in-depth, once again considering the novella format, exploration of Arthur C. Clarke's third law of science fiction, which states that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This is precisely why the tale works as science fiction from the point of view of Nia and the reader, but as fantasy from the point of view of Lynette's fourth daughter. Her people are now far too removed in time from their spacefaring ancestors to understand that they in fact came from another planet, or that Nia isn't a wizard, but a scientist with access to advanced technology. Similarly, if I, or any of you, were to travel back in time with our smartphones, for example, we would surely be perceived as, I don't know, wizards, witches, or demons, or even gods, as was kind of the case with some of the Mesoamericans who first met the Spanish conquistadors, to disastrous consequences in their case. Interestingly, though, this theme is what I'll call double-layered, because Nia is also confronted with something he does not understand and cannot understand, despite the advanced tech he uses. The strange phenomenon I mentioned plaguing Lyness's land, or the area right next to it to be more precise. She calls this thing a demon, and at first Nia objects, obviously he's a scientist, but as the story progresses, he slowly realizes that he might as well consider it a magical or demonic force, for all he does not, and cannot, understand about it. It's not that he abandons his scientific rationality altogether, but practically speaking, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because he can't make sense of this thing, so might as well call it a demon. Linked to this narrative exposition of Clarke's third law are two sub-themes. The first concerns the cultural and thus linguistic divide separating Nia and Lyness, and how this impacts their communication and attempts at reaching common ground in their understanding of the situation they face together. As I stated earlier, it is precisely the linguistic element of the world building that presents this facet of the story's theming. There's one scene in particular where Nia tries to explain what science and scientists are to Lyness, but the neural device he has implanted in his brain that allows him to speak Lyness's language keeps translating those terms, science, scientists, in her tongue to the words wizard, sorcerer, sorcery, magic, etc. Nia then tries again, using additional words, breaking the concepts down further, but Lyness still understands it as sorcery. For sorcery, to her, refers to a great knowledge of the world that allows one to manipulate it. And if you think about it, isn't that what science ultimately does for human beings? The word science, after all, means knowledge, and it is to this precise conclusion that Nia ultimately arrives. He can't ultimately bridge the gap he wants to with Lyness, but at the end of the day, he acknowledges they both understand a version of the same truth with different words. And honestly, I thought that was quite beautiful. Intercultural, intertemporal even, and interspecies communication are tried and tested themes in science fiction after all, that I particularly enjoy when they are well executed. And Adrian Tchaikovsky certainly has experience tackling the subject, as it features prominently in Children of Time as well. I always appreciate pondering the questions that arise from such ideas, especially when they are conveyed through the lens of a specifically qualified scientist, such as Nier, who in this case is an anthropologist. Which brings me to the second subtheme. Elder Race, through Nier, briefly explores the limits of objective scientific inquiry when it comes to studying actual people living their everyday lives, such as we do in anthropology or, sociology. Limits which are largely informed by the fact anthropologists and sociologists and even, biologists are themselves flawed and biased human beings who cannot ultimately remain entirely disconnected from their study matter, or they do so with great difficulty in general. Nier constantly worries about his objectivity, his impartiality, the research protocol he originally had to stick to that stated he could not interfere with the locals, etc., especially since he actually broke said protocol once already several decades before Linus shows up. But he is all alone, disconnected from other flesh and blood human beings, and cannot remain isolated in his tower forever, because no one could. His aspirations to conduct scientific research in a vacuum, as it were, are simply untenable, nor ultimately desirable in this specific context, to be honest. Then there is the second major theme of Elder Race, the experience and maladaptive management of clinical depression, delivered once again through Nier as a severely depressed character. Whilst the third law theme nourished my intellect, this one more strongly impacted my emotions, as I am someone who also suffers from chronic clinical depression, in a way very similar to that of Nier, no less. His experience reminded me of, well, mine, of course, but also of William Styron's, as he described it in his memoir, Darkness Visible, which I highly recommend, by the way. Because Nier describes depression as a crippling tempest, or, tsunami, think that kind of imagery, of negative emotions, rather than, a lack of emotions, which he struggles to contain with the aid of a special device called the Dissociative Cognition System, or DCS for short. As the name suggests, this device allows him to think without the burden of emotions, or rather more precisely, without the conscious awareness and processing of emotions. The distinction is important because those emotions do build up over time, neurologically, chemically, electrochemically in the brain, and thus often threaten to overwhelm Nier's neural system. This is why he has to unload the buildup every once in a while by, feeling all of his emotions at once. And fortunately for him, this includes the dark, nightmarish, and painful emotions of depression, which are so intense and violent, they leave him at one point during the story wailing like a child and shuddering in a fetal position on the forest floor. And I was poignantly reminded of my own meltdowns and terror attacks when I read that. I do wonder, honestly, how Adrian Tchaikovsky was able to portray this so accurately. I don't know if he suffered from depression or if he has a loved one who did, but he did a brilliant job, and I could feel everything Nier was going through. I was also moved by how Nier chose to describe his depression to Les, who obviously doesn't have any notion of, psychiatric definitions and the like. As a dark, supernatural beast, he periodically has to confront as a wizard. And I've often also pictured my own psychological pain in such a way, as a dark creature made of malevolent shadows, if you will. The reader gets access to Nier's inner thoughts, and thus all the component parts of his depression. The grief, the sadness, the soul-shattering loneliness, the trauma of having been, for all intents and purposes, abandoned on an alien world amidst people who believe him to be a wizard, and to experience time in fits and starts of alternating wakefulness and stasis sleep. As an aside, this latter point, this trauma of time passing whilst in abnormal stasis sleep and, just losing your sense of time, this theme is also beautifully explored and with more depth in Children of Time specifically. Finally, I could intimately relate to Nia's more general struggle to manage his emotions. His DCS device is a double-edged sword after all, and what it does essentially is enable a severe form of dissociation if you think about it. Something which usually occurs in human beings who experience violently traumatic events, so not exactly super healthy. Milder forms of dissociation are also common in a variety of neuropsychiatric conditions, such as autism, I should know. And both autism and depression can make the identification and subsequent management of emotions more difficult. That would be alexithymia. I'm not gonna lie, it would be nice to have something like the DCS device, but at the same time, I can recognize the inherent risks that would come with such a thing. Emotional numbness is already something depressed people can experience with certain antidepressants, and that has been my case. And whilst it can offer short-term relief, no one is meant to live their entire lives feeling nothing, you know, and you do need to address your emotions at some point. Not to mention that when you cut out all emotions, you cut out all the positive ones as well. I know this all sounds pretty, well, depressing, perhaps, but just as with the magicians, and without spoiling anything, Elder Race does have an earned, optimistic, and pretty heartwarming ending that confirmed this novella as a near-perfect literary creation for me, that I consequently rated a very rare 10 out of 10. Everything just came together and worked to make something thought-provoking, emotionally impactful, and memorable. Not to mention that, because of the narrative style, the atmosphere, the character work, and the theming, I was delightfully reminded of one of my favorite authors, late Ursula K. Le Guin. I think she would have approved of this one, as I do, without any reservation. So that concludes my rave review of Elder Race, written by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Obviously, I would highly recommend it if you like short fiction, short science fiction that is thoughtful, meaningful, emotional, and that will stick with you despite the short page count. And of course, if you want to share your thoughts about this novella in the comments down below, you're more than welcome to. On that note, I hope you'll have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all reasonably soon in another video. Bye-bye.